dudes, what's happening? This is Trent, and just a couple of days ago, interesting question came in from Aria, and I don't want to try to mispronounce your name, so I'll just say Aria, asks, what is the difference between a character designer and a concept artist? And I thought this was a great question because when we look at video games, now my expertise is in video games and concept art for video games, and I've watched this industry change a lot over the last few years. When I was a kid, I'd see games like Chrono Trigger with a credit, like right in the title that says character designer Akira Toriyama. It splashes his name across the screen with like dramatic percussion, you know what I mean? Oh yeah, by the way, also, this is Chrono Trigger. The title's all small, but the guy's name is huge. Nowadays we have guys like Tetsuya Nomura, who is credited as the character designer. In Japan, this is a very prestigious title. This is a title that basically means that you focus on your character designs. And they have fans, like they have fan bases. It's sort of like it's a celebrity status is what it is. People cosplay as their character designs. They get hired to focus on just the character designs. A lot of times they're coming from manga or something like that. But people want their character designs. They'll buy a game just because that character designer worked on that game in Japan. Essentially, it just means that you focus on designing characters, and you might be thinking, oh man, I want to do that. I want to do that so bad. That's all I want to do is characters. I can't stand drawing props or I ain't gonna like paint no trees or design no tanks or nothing like that. I just want to be the character designer. You know, Yoji Shinkawa, a character designer, right? We want to be the rockstar character designer that has the fans that follow whatever game we get hired onto to design characters for it. But here's the problem. If you're not Japanese, that ain't happening. If you're not in Japan, that ain't happening. It does not happen in the West. We do have artists who specialize in only doing character design. We call them concept artists. And those concept artists never get credited as character designer. This is an unusual phenomenon that seems to only happen in Japan. Now, before you get upset at me about this, just show me otherwise. Show me somebody who's credited as the character designer on a game in the US. We might have some rockstar celebrity who was a rockstar celebrity before he was working at that company, but otherwise it don't exist, even if all you do at a game studio is design freaking characters. And it doesn't even seem to matter how good you are. If you're amazing at it, they still won't give you that title. Perfect example, Paul Kwan, also known as Zeronis, at Riot Games. And I've talked about this guy before. I love his artwork. This guy does masterful character designs. He is a character designer at Riot Games, but his title, well, one, you never hear his name, but he's designed some of the most iconic characters for that game. You never hear his name as the character designer because he's in the US. If this kid were in Japan, he would be considered a character designer and people would follow him more than they would follow just the game that he's working on. Instead, he just characterized and credited as a concept artist because U.S. companies do not want their artists becoming too independent, acknowledged, recognized, that sort of a thing. It may also have to do with the cultural difference. In Japan, generally, artists don't just leave companies the way that they do in the US. In the US, it's like you work in a company for a couple of years, you ship a game. Nowadays, they're becoming more like a service, so that's shifting a little bit. Some people feel pretty lucky if they've worked at a studio for 3 or 4 years. But by then, they're pretty bored with whatever they're doing anyway. I mean, as awesome as it is to paint orcs every day, after 4 or 5 years, you kind of want to paint something other than orcs, you know? But in Japan, it's sort of like the old... as I understand it, and please, I'm not Japanese, so please correct me if I'm wrong on this, and I know that things are changing, but the way that I was taught when I was studying Japanese culture when I worked at Capcom was that you get hired into a Japanese company, and it's like you're part of the family. It's like you are, even back in the day, they used to encourage you to be a lifelong employee at a company. They do everything that they could to have you working there for 30 plus years. It was like, you're part of the family. You're not leaving unless you really, really want to. I don't want to go into all the things that they would do to try to keep you there, but it involved even helping you get married so that you'd have a family, so that you needed a job, so that you would need to stay there for 20 or 30 years. So it might have something to do with that, where they're like, okay, well, we can give our artists more credit because of that. We give them this credit and they're not going to be just leaving and going to another company anytime soon, because it's unheard of. Who would do that? Or it could more likely have to do with the fact that a lot of times these character designers in Japan, they become famous doing something entirely different. They become famous for their character designs on their manga, or they become famous for their character designs on another game where they somehow got credit for that. But more than likely, that artist, if they didn't work there before and they're credited as a character designer, they negotiated like hell to make sure that their name was in the title as that. It's usually not something they voluntarily give to you. So you have to come to the table with a lot of clout. If you're already famous for your character designs and they know they're going to sell more copies of their game because you're designing the characters, that's how you get that title on a game at a US or a Western game development studio. Otherwise, it ain't happening, brother. How famous do you need to be? Well, Tsukimi-chan's pretty famous. Maybe she could pull it off, but honestly, only mostly artists or people interested in art are gonna know who she is. So even more, like, you'd have to be super celebrity famous. You'd have to be like bigger than Todd McFarlane famous. Maybe he could do it. Basically, you just have to be a household name somehow. I read an article that gave Miyazaki character designer credit on Dark Souls, and I thought that was so inappropriate, so wrong, so misinformed to give the game designer the character design credit, because he's not the guy designing the characters. He's designing the gameplay. He's designing the experience. I think he directed the game. That's a different thing. As Americans, I think as humans in general, we love the idea that one guy had a clear vision and he accomplished that clear vision. But the reality of it is so rarely truly that. I don't want to point out anybody specifically, but I was watching a YouTuber talking about how excited he was about Left Alive, which is this game that has character designs by Yoji Shinkawa. I love Yoji Shinkawa too, and I love his character designs. But this guy was saying, oh, it's all the art is by Yoji Shinkawa. And it's like, man, what a slap in the face to the development team who actually push polygons around, sculpt meticulous details into the characters, UV unwrap that, rig it. You got your tech artists that go in to try to figure out difficult technical problems. You've got your entire teams of people that are busting their ass just on singular characters, let alone to bring the rest of the whole world to life. And then Kotaku or whoever is going to do an article that says art by Yoji Shinkawa. Ouch. So you can decide for yourself whether or not you think that's fair. And generally in the US, they don't tend to like to give any of their studio artists a rock star status. Why? Because that means they got to pay them more. And that amount that they got to pay them is generally pretty substantial. And furthermore, there's the very strong chance that if they're in the West, if they've got a rock star status as a character designer, there's a good chance that some other studio is going to come along and pay them way more money and just steal their talent away. And so it ends up becoming this kind of thing where it's like, you don't want your artist getting too big for their britches. I don't agree with that necessarily. Yeah, but it is what it is, and can't change what is what is. It just is. If you are like, well, hey, I only want to be a character designer, and that's the title that I want to have, and I don't live in Japan, but that's what I want to be, well, you should go ahead and just be your own character designer for your own stuff. With the very clear understanding that it's very unlikely that you would ever get hired as a character designer and get that rockstar status that you're looking for. At least in the game development industry, anyway. That doesn't mean you can't design characters as a concept artist working for a studio. You just never get credited as a character designer. No matter how good your character designs are, it doesn't really make a difference. Maybe start your own game studio, or write your own books, or do your own comics, or something like that. Make yourself famous for your character designs, and then you can negotiate when some video game company says, hey, we want to make video games with your name on the title. Then you can say, well, sure, okay, fine, but only if I'm the character designer, and my name needs to be bigger than the logo of the game, because that's real important to me. And if that's important to you, then that's the way you should do that. But if you want to work as a concept artist at a Western studio and design characters, just settle for the concept artist title and go in and do your best at that. So I'm all about the facts, here. So I wanted to do a little bit of research. So I went ahead and I Googled famous character designers on Google, and what I came up with was there are a few Westerners, Bud Lucky, who you may be familiar with if you're into animation. Although I don't think that he only wore the title of a character designer. If you look at his information on Google anyway, it turns out he did a lot in animation across the board. So he didn't just wear that one badge. Carlos Grangel, Spanish designer, also working in animated films. A lot of these guys, though, you'll notice a lot of Japanese guys. Akira Toriyama, Yoshitaka Amano. Toriyama you might know as the Dragon Ball Z creator. Yoshitaka Amano for his contribution to Final Fantasy years ago. Akemi Takada, manga artist, again, backing up my point. None of these guys are character designers in video games, all animation. So the animation industry may have a different perspective on the title of character designer than video games. They became famous in another industry, or they worked in animation. So that may very well be an outlet for you if you're dead set on only designing characters. Maybe focus some of your interest on just doing animation and design for animation. Perhaps that could have something to do with just the fact that the game industry is still relatively young. But as you can see, I mean, none of these, not one of them, are a game developer character designer. From the West anyway. It's kind of a bummer too. I mean, maybe I'll just start calling myself a damn character designer. I mean, I've been doing it long enough. Put my name on the Wheaties. Oh, by the way, if you like this painting that I've been doing, this is really just kind of a sketch for my own famous series of novels and comics called Twilight Monk. If you want to watch a near real-time video and dissect my process for all the color blending layers and weird stuff that you saw me doing in this video, I have all of that stuff over on my Gumroad channel because people ask all the time, how do I do what you do? Well, I sell that stuff, of course. I got into art for the fortune and glory, baby. But I'll tell you what, if you want all the freebies, I do a lot of tutorials and stuff like that here for free on my YouTube channel. So why don't you subscribe? And if you have questions about how the game industry works or doing concept art for a living, I'd be happy to answer them. Leave those in the comments below the video. Or if you just want to inform me as to some famous character designers working in the video game industry that are household names in the US, I'd love to hear about them. And dudes, you know what to do. I'll catch y'all mañana, bon. And ciao, baby. Oh, yeah.